What's good? It's Woog. Rest in peace to Frankie Beverly, first of all. He was the legendary Maze frontman, a very beloved recording artist and performer. Now, I wanted to weigh in a bit on Canelo's performance against Edgar Berlanga and Berlanga's performance against Canelo, but also, just the context, what this means for Canelo's future and perhaps even for Berlanga's future. Now, a lot of people are unimpressed with Canelo, especially in these recent fights, right? Since he stopped knocking people out, basically everything since his Caleb Plant stoppage win, where he became undisputed at 168. Then he lost to Dimitri Bivol. He had the trilogy fight against 40-year-old Triple G. Then he fights John Ryder, Jermell Charlo, who comes up from 154. He fights Jaime Munguia, and now he fights Edgar Berlanga. So Canelo Alvarez was always a small 168. He beats Berlanga here via decision, drops him with a nice left hook in the third round, but doesn't stop Berlanga. And so a lot of people are like, damn, you couldn't stop Berlanga. I'm thinking Berlanga is a big boy. You know what I mean? Like, he is 168, and it's one thing for these two guys to meet at 168 where Canelo's in his mid 30s and Berlanga's in his mid 20s basically. But being that there's such an age gap, what does that tell you? I mean, look at where these guys were when they were in their 20s. Canelo was like at 154 when he was Berlanga's age. Maybe he came up to 160 by then, but he was a 154, 160 guy who then, messed around at 168 and 175. Berlanga in his 20s has been a long time 168 guy. Berlanga at some point is going to be a light heavyweight, like a true light heavyweight. If he sticks around till he's 34, 35, he might even end up being a cruiserweight. So although these guys are both fighting at 168, they're not the same size. Like, Canelo weighed in a couple pounds below the 168 pound limit, whereas Berlanga rehydrated and entered the ring at reportedly 191, 192. He put on over 20 pounds since the weigh-in, which also speaks to a little bit of the hypocrisy in Canelo not wanting to fight David Benavidez, talking about he's gonna put on all this weight after the weigh-in and then I gotta fight that guy. Well, look at Edgar Berlanga. So it's not that you don't want to fight bigger guys, you just don't want to fight good, really good bigger guys. That's how I read that, because on its merits, there's nothing that Berlanga did to deserve this shot. And it's not that Berlanga, and I said this in the preview, it's not that Berlanga is like a bum. He's not a bad fighter. He just didn't check any of the boxes on the way to the top. Like, usually we see guys go from, a prospect to a prospect / contender. Then they have a couple of those proving ground fights where you have big step-ups in competition. Who are Berlanga's step-ups? It was Patrick McCrory, Marcelo Caceres, Jason Quigley. Like, where were the step-ups? There was none of that. How often do we see it where it's a guy who's done nothing to prove that he deserves the opportunity who ends up getting the opportunity? This was based on name recognition. This was based on them being able to play up a Mexican versus Puerto Rican type of event. But Edgar Berlanga, on the merits, didn't deserve to be in the ring with Canelo Alvarez, period. I can name 6 other 168 pound guys who had done more to deserve the shot. So the justifications or the rationales behind Canelo's matchmaking, it's just become increasingly frustrating to even listen to it. It's like he's insulting the public's intelligence with some of these excuses. Again, Edgar Berlanga reportedly was fighting at around 191, 192. But if you look at the fight itself, Canelo did hit Berlanga with a bunch of big shots. Canelo is not a big 168 guy. He went the distance with Callum Smith. If you look at the 168 guys he stopped, yes, he did stop Caleb Plant, and yes, that was very impressive. He stopped him in the late rounds. But Billy Joe Saunders was a 154, 160 guy who was then fighting at 168. Avni Yildirim was not in Canelo's galaxy in terms of skill. Rocky Fielding, that was an impressive early stoppage. It was a younger Canelo who went up to 168 for the first time, stopped Rocky Fielding, who's got some good wins in his career. So Canelo does have good stoppages at 168. I just looked at that as being an instance where you've got a guy who's such a good boxer in Canelo, who does have so much power and couples those two, power with the skill, to where he's just performing way above his means, way above his weight class, his natural weight class, if you will. So as he ages, he stopped getting stoppages. He obviously didn't stop Dimitri Bivol, but he didn't stop Triple G in the trilogy fight, which I don't think anybody really expected Triple G to get stopped. But then you look at John Ryder, Jermell Charlo, Jaime Munguia, Edgar Berlanga. He's just not stopping these guys anymore. I mean, he's still a big puncher, but I would slow down with he's one of the biggest punchers in the sport. He was at a time when he was working up from 154 to 160, and then when he got to 168, one of the biggest punches in the sport. He still has a very, very big punch, but I think it's a mixture of energy levels. When you get into the second half of fights, he can't just continue to put his foot on the gas. He's got to respect these guys. Some of these guys' power he has to respect. He respected Berlanga's power throughout this fight, and he himself, Canelo, got hit with some big shots that got his attention. And it's not like Berlanga, say what you want about the deservingness of him getting this golden ticket against Canelo. He did fight hard, and I do think he fought to win. He tried to hurt Canelo. He sold out on some of those punches. He tried to implement some tricky timing and try to catch Canelo slipping with some right hands over the top, with some big left hooks, with some popping jabs. He rocked Canelo's head back a few times with that jab. But yes, Berlanga did end up resorting to getting on his back foot and did find himself on the ropes pretty early in the fight. I was surprised that Berlanga was going back to the ropes almost as a source of refuge, letting Canelo kind of size him up in front of him with his back against the ropes and start throwing shots, especially to the body. So Canelo was mixing it up top, down low. Berlanga was just durable enough, young enough, determined enough to work through that and to make it the 12-round distance. So props to Berlanga. He actually made this a somewhat interesting fight. Yes, he did lose 10 rounds to 2, 9 rounds to 3, but he did fight as well as he could have fought against Canelo. Again, there was just such a big skill gap, but then there was such a big size gap that no, Canelo couldn't finish the job against Berlanga and couldn't get the stoppage. So he hasn't gotten a stoppage in his last 6 fights, but he has gotten a knockdown in his last 4 fights. He dropped John Ryder. He dropped Jermell Charlo. He dropped Jaime Munguia. He dropped Edgar Berlanga. So he's still doing enough to hurt these guys. And especially in the first half of these fights, when he's doing that patient stalking, that patient hunting, being very economical in punch output, he is setting big shots up and he is hurting these guys. He's dropping them. Again, I think he just hit the wall where he himself doesn't want to get hurt. He also doesn't want to tire himself out to where a Jaime Munguia could start letting his hands go and then do even more damage. So I think he's managing his gas tank. He is still looking for opportunities to throw and land big shots, even in the second half of fights, but it's often not enough to get it done. In the case of Munguia and Berlanga, they were just able to absorb his shots. In the case of John Ryder ended up mounting a little bit of a rally towards the end of that fight. Against Jermell Charlo had made his mind up early. I'm trying to survive this one. I ain't trying to win it. I ain't trying to get knocked out. I'm trying to move because I'm not trying to lock horns with this guy. That's what happened with Canelo versus Jermell Charlo. Super disappointing. But again, to Berlanga's credit, he did fight hard. And I thought that if anything was going to start really wearing him down and start opening the door for a stoppage, I thought that it was going to be some of that work Canelo was doing to Berlanga's body, but Berlanga absorbed those well, and he even tried to time Canelo coming in. Sometimes when Canelo would try to let go to the body, Berlanga would come with a counter, a right hand over the top, so that actually reduced Canelo's willingness to go to Berlanga's body. There were moments where Canelo was right in front of him and wasn't letting a lot of punches go because he was respecting the possibility of a hard counter. So yeah, Berlanga had Canelo's respect to a degree. Canelo pretty easily, or at least observably and clearly, won most of these rounds. But I do think that this kind of built Berlanga's reputation of, at least we know this about Berlanga now. He's got a pretty good chin. He's got some heart. He doesn't have a lot of nuance to his punch patterns. He's still kind of basic when it comes to that. It's just that he has so much brute force and physical talent that he could let predictable punches go and sometimes still be effective. But I also thought he defended pretty well. There were a lot of times where Canelo would try to load up on big shots and would whiff because Berlanga either jumped back, ducked, moved, blocked. Berlanga was doing a lot to reduce the punch by punch effectiveness of Canelo Alvarez. If he wasn't able to do that, if Berlanga couldn't do those things defensively, he was going to get stopped in this fight. But he did enough defensively and offensively to go the distance here. So I get why people are less than enthused and less than impressed in some cases with Canelo Alvarez. He's clearly still a phenomenal boxer. He's still one of the top 2 in the division. If you still consider David Benavidez even approximating 168, I don't know if Benavidez will ever come and fight at 168 again. He's now entering his like late 20s, although he's the same age as Edgar Berlanga, believe that or not. David Benavidez and Edgar Berlanga are both 27 years old. So yeah, as Benavidez gets closer to 30, it's going to be hard to keep on losing weight and making 168. He's already had that one fight against Gvozdyk at 175. I have doubts on whether he could come down to 168. And if he does come down to 168, I question whether he will be at his best or whether he'll be diminished due to a difficult weight cut. But yeah, I get the disappointment in Canelo's fight by fight schedule. I want to see Canelo versus Benavidez about as much as I want to see any fight in the entire sport. It just seems like Canelo will keep on making excuses not to fight this guy. And now, since David Benavidez is no longer the WBC mandatory, it's like Canelo's now down to fight mandatories like Edgar Berlanga, and it's just maddening. And you know, the WBC has a lot of culpability here too. They aided and abetted Canelo's ducking of David Benavidez. That was atrocious from a sanctioning body perspective. But yeah, if Canelo doesn't fight David Benavidez next, let's assume that he doesn't. The question is, does Canelo fight again in 2024? Does he fight in December? If he fights in December, might it be Terence Crawford or no? Because I don't think Crawford is excited about much else at this stage. Crawford's what, like 37 now? I don't think Crawford is interested in fighting Virgil Ortiz, a rematch with Madrimov, any one of these 154 guys, even Sebastian Fundora. Now, I think that title unification fights might add to the intrigue a little bit for Terence Crawford, but I think Crawford is after, you know, the huge mega payday against Canelo and the chance of becoming an all-time great. You could argue that he already is, but if he beats Canelo, that's next level stuff for somebody to come up from 154. He only had one fight at 154, Crawford did, and he looks like he's maxing out in terms of what he's physically capable of by fighting at 154. To have that fight against Madrimov and have it be as competitive as it was, and then go up 2 more divisions to fight Canelo, if he pulls that off, that will be one of the greatest feats in boxing history, period. When you consider the weights, the age, and the quality of opponent. But are we gonna get that? Is Turki Al-Sheikh gonna do enough to get Canelo to agree to make that happen? Will the money be enough for Canelo versus Crawford in December? If it's not Canelo versus Crawford in December, does Canelo even fight in December? I question whether Canelo can do these quick turnarounds in the way that he was even in 2021, when in one calendar year, not all in 2021, starting at the end of 2020, but in one calendar year, fought Callum Smith, Avni Yildirim, Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant. I don't think that at 34, whatever Canelo is right now, I don't think that he could do that as easily. So I have questions on whether he could return to the ring in 3 months. I think Eddie Reynoso in some interview might have suggested that Canelo returns on Cinco de Mayo. So that's possible. Maybe we don't see Canelo again for the rest of 2024. If I was to bet, look, I want Canelo versus Crawford. If we don't get Canelo versus Benavidez, I want Canelo versus Crawford. But I almost feel like it's more likely that we have to wait till May for Canelo to return to the ring. And if he does return to the ring and it's not until May, is that when he runs it with Crawford? Because then Crawford will be knocking on the door of 38 years old by May of 2025. I feel like that might be it for any possibility of Crawford beating Canelo. It's going to be tough sledding as is. And the odds are going to be stacked against him, clearly. I see a lot of problems and red flags in Crawford trying to beat Canelo. A couple years ago, I thought that it might be possible. Now I'm having bigger doubts. But if it's not Benavidez and it's not Crawford and it takes place in May, the only other thing that makes sense is Canelo versus the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol. I don't think Canelo's going to fight Christian Mbili. I don't think he's going to fight Diego Pacheco. what else is there at 168 for Canelo Alvarez, right? So I think it's going to be a glory fight. It's either going to be a rematch, which he says he wants, and he's been saying that he wants it kind of off and on, you know, in terms of how much he's talking about wanting it, but he's basically saying that he wants Dimitri Bivol if Bivol beats Beterbiev. Does he want Beterbiev if Beterbiev beats Bivol? I mean, it would be a shot at undisputed. So there's still that chance of, you know, that type of glory to become the undisputed light heavyweight champion against Beterbiev or Bivol. But Canelo really wants to fight Dimitri Bivol a second time. He wants that one back. I just don't think he wanted to fight Dimitri Bivol with Bivol coming down to 168 to fight Canelo there, which, I mean, that was an interesting proposition. Basically Bivol saying, no, let me come find you this time at 168. Canelo wasn't having it. They ended up not making that rematch, and here we are now. But I think that it is possible that they run it back, Canelo versus Bivol, in May if Bivol beats Beterbiev. If Bivol loses to Beterbiev and no longer has, not only doesn't have all 4 belts, but doesn't even have that WBA belt that he's had for years now, is it going to be as intriguing just because it's a rematch and Canelo having a chance to avenge a loss? Like, if Beterbiev beats Bivol, would Canelo rather fight Beterbiev for all the belts? Even though I believe, as it stands, Benavidez has the mandatory, has the right to fight the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol. So if Bivol beats Beterbiev, I think Benavidez is next in line anyway. So even if Canelo wants the Bivol fight, I think it's supposed to be Benavidez who gets that fight. So there is that to consider. But if Canelo had a choice of fighting Beterbiev for all 4 belts, or if Beterbiev beats Bivol, to fight and rematch Bivol for no light heavyweight belts, which would Canelo rather do? I think he would rather do Beterbiev, even though it's hard to picture Canelo fighting Beterbiev if Beterbiev is still the thrasher that he's been throughout his career. It's just a very dangerous opponent. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on who Canelo is going to fight next. And then for Edgar Berlanga, I think that his next fight is going to be a get well fight, right? Against somebody who he's supposed to beat. Somebody along the lines of who he's been fighting his whole career before this Canelo fight. I don't think it's going to be a Diego Pacheco, a Jaime Munguia, anybody of that caliber. Those are the guys we wanted to see him fight. Those are the types. David Morrell, one of those guys, to show how bad you are before you fight Canelo. But where does Berlanga go from here? Will he build the appetite after getting this Canelo payday? Does he have a willingness to fight these other top 5, top 6, 168 pounders? I don't know. I hope that he does. I hope that he's willing to fight the other best guys not named Canelo. But sometimes I wonder, when these guys get the big payday, sometimes their appetite for destruction is lessened, and then they start growing accustomed to wanting a certain amount of money, and they're not going to make any of the fights that matter against the opponents that matter if they don't get some ridiculous amount of money. I'm sure Berlanga is going to want, for instance, for Turki Al-Sheikh to fund his next, big fight against a big opponent, something like that. So I think that Turki Al-Sheikh's participation might be the only way that we get a Berlanga fight against another non-Canelo top 168 pounder. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on the fight, first of all, between Canelo and Berlanga, and what do you think is going to happen in the aftermath of this fight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.